Welcome to Theory and Practice, a podcast dedicated to decoding research in the field of speech-language pathology.
We dive deep into the latest evidence-based practices, demystify complex studies, and provide practical insights for implementing research findings in your everyday therapy sessions. Hi, my name is Sarah, a school-based SLP with a passion for intervention strategies, and
I am John. I am a doctoral student specializing in AAC and implementation science. Join us as we unpack evidence-based practices and empower you to provide the highest quality care for your clients.
As a disclaimer, this is just our personal opinions and thoughts. It is not meant to misinform or claim the intentions of the literature or publication. We also encourage you to read and interpret the findings independently.
Okay, so today, Sarah, I would like to introduce you to a research note, actually. Do you know what a research note is?
No. Is it just a note about research?
Okay, so I don't know if a lot of our ASHA members or our speech language pathologists know, but in our ASHA journals, there are different types of research articles that are published here. And so today, what we want to talk about is a research article identified under the research note. And I think ASHA identifies this research note as this. A research note is a brief manuscript presenting pilot, preliminary, and or exploratory findings, or a new method of the collection or analysis of data. It includes short abstract and introductory paragraph. The scientific findings should be explained and documented concisely. So it's basically more of an exploratory research rather than just we did this study and we found this. So today we're going to be talking about that. It's actually on evidence-based practice for school-based SLPs.
Yes. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on what this journal says. So I want us to just jump right into it. And we're going to the title alone says so much, does it not, John? The title alone, right? So it's school-based speech-language pathologists, engagement with evidence-based practice, an update with implications for implementation research. So this kind of sets the stage for our entire podcast.
Right. So I think our number one phenomenon that you and I see is that clinicians and researchers are rarely in conversation. Right? We never have the ability to sit down over coffee and talk about research. And by doing so, researchers don't understand what clinicians are going through. And I don't think clinicians have the time to tell researchers, like, this is what we want to know. So I feel like in our field that research and practice, they're not in conversation. So I think the podcast here is to create a space where researchers take time and the clinicians take time and have a genuine conversation to see where research and practice are not in alignment. And hopefully, maybe the conversation between you and I can create something that put these two things in conversation or in alignment for our practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I think it'll be a great opportunity for researchers to really know what clinicians are going through and how can we adapt our research methods that reflects what therapists are facing in their everyday works setting.
Well, tell us about this article.
Okay, so let's start with the abstract here, right? So this abstract is it's a replication of a prior survey that was conducted in 2013. And this article was published in October of 2023. So it's been fairly recent, and they wanted to replicate the study done by Hoffman and others in 2013 to document current evidence-based practice patterns reported by school-based SLPs. Right, during the 2021 to 2022 school year. So basically, we're going to do the same survey again and see if we find anything that's different, right? So what they did was they created an online survey, right? SLPs reported their training experiences, workplace resources, frequency. So again, if SLPs don't have time to conduct evidence-based practice, do they even have time to respond to all these questions? I don't know. So they did us right. So basically, it's an online survey talking about their training and evidence-based practice, workplace resources, frequency and engagement with evidence-based practice activities. There was a total of 889 SLPs across the US, across all 50 states. So this was basically what these researchers thought, that this was a valid information across the US, right? Regardless of what setting you're in. You can either be in a school setting with in a very, rich environment with, the communities that are well funded, or you can be at a Title I school. You don't know, right? So you're comparing all these things through a survey study of 889 SLPs across the US. And these authors have found that doing this type of study about evidence-based practice would give us an idea of what SLPs are doing. So again, it's this general idea of what are SLPs doing in general, right? And I think there's so many additional information that are being missed when we just do a survey study like this. Okay.
I think what's most impressive to me is the fact that they even could collect 800. It's that already. I'm just, first of all, I don't have time. So I get those online surveys. I'm like, I don't have time to be doing this. And then lately, I've been seeing more like incentivizing people to fill out the surveys as well. Like,
right.
Or we're going to put your name in a lottery, and then we're going to like give you an Amazon gift card if you win.
Right.
So I think that can also, I don't know, like if I don't have enough time to do it, but I'm doing it anyway, like, am I giving really good answers? Is, I guess.
Right. And I think there are so many things that aren't being asked about that person's school environment too. Like, for example, like if the administration is not really providing support, or if the admin doesn't even know what you do you even have time to get, professional development hours to go to ASHA or to any of the state conferences and things like that. So I think the survey is a great idea. It's a great place to start. But I feel like we're also missing that contextual substance of like why this SLP responded that way. So for me, I feel like we're missing that type of that nature in a survey study.
I also wonder, in a survey study, John, does that also mean that they were closed answers?
So survey studies can be many, many things. So for example, if we're doing a lot of most survey studies are multiple choice in a sense that is like, oh, sometimes, never, frequent. Like they would, and that's how they would quantify our responses. So they can say, like 20% of SLPs, they say they frequently do X, Y, and Z. Or 10% of SLPs, they say they always look at research. Da, da, da. So that's how they're making these type of statements, right? But within a survey, people get tired answering questions continuously over next. Or another type of survey question is like 1 out of 5, rate yourself, right? But then if these questions get if there's a lot of those questions, I don't know, we don't even know, is number 1 the highest or is number 5 the highest?
Well, I also feel like when you say things like sometimes, somewhat, or like this is very subjective. Like my idea of what that sometimes might be is like different from somebody else, right? And so it's still, I don't feel it gives a lot of information to, I don't know. It seems a little misleading.
So there are room for
error.
Error. Yes, thank you. I'm having like anomic moments here. So there are room for errors. You're absolutely right, right? And then, like I said, there's the time component. I'm sure a lot of these SLPs have done these surveys at a school site during their work hours, right? Maybe on my 30-minute lunch break. I'm sure it wouldn't hurt. And then you realize it's like 60, 70 questions that I have to answer, right? Um, because they ask you about the demographics, what grade level. I'm sure they ask all those like demographic questions and then say, in 1 out of 5, how much do you read or what type of journals do you read? And I'm sure when it gets that type of specific, I'm sure they're already burnt out. And I'm sure if the school bell is ringing and the kids are coming, their SLPs are just click, 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 submit.
Right. So here's a question for you, John. Outside of a survey, what else could there have been?
So research, I always think of this as a snapshot, right? So at this moment in time, we take a snapshot of it and then we display it. That's what these authors have done, right? Shannon Hall Mills, we have Ireland, we have Perry Flynn, we have Lavelle Hoffman, Murray Ireland. So they just did a snapshot by conducting a survey studies. And I think all of these studies are just snapshots of instances. So I can do an interview study, snapshot of what's going on then and now. I can do an ethnographic observation of the SLP of at that during that time period or during that moment, right? Or I can do a case study of what happened during that school year, right? So it's always a snapshot of what's going on at that time. But sometimes we get passionate with the data that we collected and we tend to go a little bit overboard and say this is the overall findings. This is what SLPs are dealing with, right? So it feels like we have to understand what research is and how consumers of research are really interpreting the data here.
Oh, you make a really good point, John. So let me just to reiterate and re-clarify that. What you're saying here is that like the way researchers are also viewing their own research too, and reading research is very much like a snapshot. It's not conclusive. Like it doesn't mean that it's for everything, everybody's like that or something. But what's actually happening is like maybe a lot of us are using evidence, like we're using the research that way, like because this single research has said it is true. Is that kind of what you're?
So I think I think this is one thing that we have learned from our SLP graduate program is like, what is evidence-based practice? And when we read clinical trials, right? And we say, from this clinical trial with this participant, we found this finding. And then we tend to forget that this was for this particular group of people that they did their trials on. And the findings was very specific to the participants that you found. And then we tend to say, okay, then I'm going to try it on my kid and see what happens.
Yes. Yes.
So
I don't think that's necessarily wrong either.
It's not. But I think people tend to forget that when I worked with this participant, this is the result I found. And I feel like the consumers of research should really understand that for this participant, this was the finding. If I try to implement the same thing, hopefully I get the same thing, maybe not. But we tend to forget that part when we be like, try it on your kid. You'll probably get the same thing.
Okay.
Right? For example, like a research on minimal pairs. We've learned so much that these one sound differences will help them understand this, right? So, and it's been generalized. Let's try minimal pairs for this kid. Let's try minimal pairs on that kid. So we have to understand that that research is just a one snapshot picture of with this participant, we did this intervention. This was a result we found. We hope, and that's why there's always a limitation section at the end. Is like, we cannot guarantee, it's basically like a disclaimer sentence saying, we cannot guarantee or we need extra research to validate this finding. Or maybe the sample size was too small on this research. We got to do it at a larger scale to see if it replicates. So the one thing that a lot of researchers are really looking for is like the validity. If I implement the same thing, do I get the same results? Can I replicate and get the same results consistently? And that's another epistemological question I want to share that with you. But let's go into the let's go into the study a little bit here. I feel like we're getting off topic. So let's go into the introduction, right? So if those who are following along, I do want to point out in the article on page 1156, right, where they talk about implementation science, right? So they say even with consistent emphasis on the importance of evidence-based practice, concerns persist regarding the uptake of evidence-based practice in leading to questions about the best way to fully realize evidence-based practice in current practice. So even the authors are saying, okay, evidence-based practice in a research study is great, but how do I apply it in my work setting? It's a little tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have suggested implementation science may offer a way to bridge the gap, right? It has been defined as the study of adoption of EBP in real-world settings, right? So in the school context, SLPs have to match the student's need. So there is a mismatch between intervention research design and the critical realities. That's what the overall statement that this researcher is saying, is that the research design and the clinical realities may not mesh up. And this is exactly the thing I want to say, is like the research design was meant for this particular participant. This is a particular finding given the research design. And then the clinical reality may not work in your may not work in your favor, may be different, things like that to take into consideration.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to. Okay, well, I know that we try to move on already, but I do, I do need to say. I want to say it. I need to say it.
Okay.
Is that like? Well, I think that when we do look at, okay, so when we say something is evidence-based practice,
right?
Typically, that means that there was research supporting that, whatever that practice is that you're doing, but also it includes your clinical experience. Remember from ASHA, the three, the
yes,
right?
The pyramid, yes.
Yes. So
yes,
one part is research, publication, and one is your clinical judgment. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, is the third one your clinical experience?
So the third piece is like the input of the clients, input from the clients and the families, those who are receiving services, right? So when we bring those three together, that's what ASHA proposes as evidence-based practice.
So to your point, just to like circle this a little bit, right? So to your point, based off of what ASHA calls EBP, right? Like, because the research is only this one part of the 3 points, right? Of the three points of that triangle, right? Like sometimes we're reading the evidence, you could try it out, and it's up to your clinical judgment if you feel like it's not working, or like it's up to your clinical experience that like, I don't think this is going to work for my student because I'm not going to create that environment for them, or like I don't have the possibility, or whatever it is, right?
Or maybe the client or the participant, I'm calling it participant, the client, the student that you're working with may not be appropriate, or
you're not meeting the eligibility the same way as the
correct.
So I think that, but for some reason I do feel strongly, how about this? I wonder when SLPs are talking about EBP, are they heavily really just talking about the research and perhaps making too far of a leap that like,
so that's
always going to work.
So that's my thing. I think clinicians are really looking at research as like, this is the way to do it, right? This is the way. This is what research said. So we got to do it this way. But in reality, it's like, what does your clinical judgment tell you? And how are your students responding to this? If the student is not responding or not enjoying this, you gotta change it up.
Yeah.
You gotta change it up, right? So there's also that component too. And we have to admit that we are working with humans, and
Mhm.
humans are so in difference in preference, difference on what what they like, dislike, right? Maybe this, you know, the way that it's done in research may not be the appropriate mode or the vibe that the students are really checking with their SLPs on.
Mhm.
So sometimes there are times when you do a therapy plan and then most of the time you just take it out because the kid's not having it that day, right? So tell me about that. You do a wonderful therapy plan. Let's say I'm gonna do minimal pairs. We're gonna like rock it with our super duper cards, right? And then the kid comes in and be like, I don't want to do any of that. Do we still stick to that therapy plan or do we have a plan B?
Yeah.
We always have a plan B regarding regardless of what the students are, how the students are feeling that day. So if that's the case for SLPs, research is the same because we're working with humans.
And I just want to state like the way that the current research that we're talking about today,
Mhm.
they're referring to EBP as like the actual research reading.
Yes, 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 yes.
Maybe I shouldn't spoil it, John. Maybe we should go through. Okay, so
Okay. So
through.
that was the introduction of it, right? So there's a disconnect between theory and practice, right? Theory, research design and the clinical reality, they're not in conversation, and they have promoted something called implementation science, right? Implementation science may be an answer to this drama between theory and practice. So this study was at this was a very like a large scale study, right? So this was an internet based study. I think they just did it all through um, the ASHA email lists or things like that. They have like reached out, right? And they wanted to find out the answers to like four research questions, right? What formal and informal training have school based SLPs had in evidence based practice, and does this differ by their career stage? What tangible and intangible resources are available for school-based SLPs to support evidence-based practice? What frequency of engagement in specific evidence-based practice activities do school-based SLPs report? And does this differ by the career stage? And what evidence-based trainings are needed to report by school-based SLPs? So let's talk about the method here. Okay, so it breaks down by recruitment and participants here, and there's so on page 1156 and 1157 for those who are following along. Let's definitely look into this, right? So the recruitments are basically adult employed as SLPs in a school or a school system in the US, providing direct services to school-age children. They're invited by email, like I said, or social media posts to participate in an online survey. Okay. So this was basically um, what uh, is it the easiest way to recruit people is doing like email blasts, and you go, and I know some of us are in the ASHA special interest blogs where some people are getting updates in their interest communities, right? I'm doing an interview study, please fill out this form, right? So again, it was basically their inclusion criteria for selection for research is adult SLPs who are working in the schools. And it was reached out through social media or email. Very, it's very easily done, right? Not a lot of work has put into the recruitment, right? So, and even the author have mentioned that they reached a broad audience of potential respondents with recruitment methods. With these exact number of potential respondents, we were unable to calculate the response rate. So that's another red flag right there. With this mass recruitment, um, they weren't able to see how many responded, how many did not. Okay. And of course, they did it on a password protected Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is kind of like a Google survey, but it's more like a password university affiliated system and things like that. And then the participants here from that recruitment process, there were 889 individuals across 50 states, right? Um, so there were, I believe, some who are just starting their careers. Some of them have been there for some time, right? Some of them were about to retire and things like that. And it was basically an online survey.
So here's the question. Why do you say that's a red flag? Like when you say that, like, oh, they don't know how many people saw it and then didn't fill it out. Like, why does that matter?
So for me, if I want to get a quality response, I want to follow up. For me, it's more about the quality and quantity. And this is where the researcher perspective comes in, right? So you can totally tell from the research itself that they want to do like a massive study. So they just did an email blast, social media blast. Anybody who has the time, please take it. And they were looking more about the quantity perspective to get an overall idea. For me, on the other hand, if someone didn't respond, I follow up because I feel like every response is valued. So I think this is a difference between a quantitative and a qualitative researcher. And I think this is where what the researcher values drastically changes your research design.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the intention also based on this method is like what it's telling me is that they wanted to find some hard numbers, right? But it's not about like, I want to know about each of you individually and your perspectives.
Mhm.
Though that might be important for like a possible follow-up, but it sounds like the measuring of this was intentional.
Yes, everything is done with intention, even with the research design, right? And this is where I want to talk a little bit about epistemology here. So I don't know if I have a feeling that not a lot of SLPs have had exposure to this type of research when I say epistemology, and this is a book from qualitative inquiry and research design, choosing among the five approaches. And when we're talking about research, there's a philosophical assumption that underlines it, right? And I think Sarah, you kind of analyzed it wonderfully here. You just want to know the current state right now. What type of, how many SLPs are doing evidence-based practice, right? For me, my epistemological stance is a little bit more about like, how are you interpreting this? What is making you, interpret your evidence-based practice? What is your idea and sense making of evidence-based practice? And that comes from our epistemology. So epistemology is defined as subjective evidence obtained from participants, right? So even though our survey study is objective in number, how we design it to collect that data was very subjective in nature. Am I making sense?
Yes. No, I understand. Yes. Okay.
Okay, because I'm saying a lot of words that are contradicting. So the data that the researchers found are hard number data. Those are objective. Yes, I definitely agree with you. But the design of how they got their how they got the data and the percentages was solely on their subjective understanding of what is the truth, what is what they believe is the real information.
I mean, this is very similar to how maybe a clinician would do an assessment on a student, right? There are standardized scores, sure, but it still required clinical judgment on my end to determine if I felt like that was just part of his repertoire or if that was actually just like a one-off or like there's still levels of like subjectiveness involved, but yeah, I could still score it, sure, like, and it would still give me quantitative of numbers, right?
Right. You're absolutely right. So it's basically like how you're conducting an assessment, a standardized assessment, right? We calculate and generate the scores, but then what would you would you consider that correct or would you consider that incorrect? That's all you.
Yes.
And that's subjective, right?
Yes.
So basically it's that. And they did a online survey of 36 questions. 36 questions to a school-based SLP is a lot. I don't know if they have time to answer all of them, but 36 questions is a lot of questions. And I think they were able to analyze this by like, do you have your degree within the last 10 years? If so, those would be considered like the early career subgroups. Let me see. Early career subgroups included all participants who complete the last CSD degree within the past 10 years, right? And anybody with a master's degree that goes beyond their 10 years, that would be considered as a seasoned career SLPs, right? And with that, our field has been emerging so much among the 10 years. So many things are like now different from when I was in grad school and the things that we're talking about now. So even with seasoned careers and early career SLPs, I'm sure there's differences in how they do things.
Yeah, and so I guess so what were the findings, John? I'm curious to know what the findings are here. So here they are, early career and seasoned career. So
Uh-huh.
they answer the first question, right? The first question being like, okay, we're gonna break these people apart and determine do they read EBP or not?
So I think there were like four big domains in the results section here. So there's like prior training and evidence-based practice, resources available to evidence-based practice, engagement in evidence-based practice activities in the workplace, and the desired evidence-based practice resources, training needs and preferences. And they do show us figures, figure one, figure two, right? So let's definitely break that down into those four domains. So within the prior training into evidence-based practice, participants indicate that, let's see here, ASHA continuing education events, other than the convention or conference sessions, right? 45% of all respondents said yes to those, right? One or more graduate level courses, are they taking some of those? Did they have evidence-based practice in that, right? 40% of all respondents, 40% of all respondents said yes. So 42.5% of early career and 35% of seasoned career. And C, ASHA convention or conference session. So 36% of the respondents have mentioned that, 38% of early career, and 32%. So in total, 28% of respondents reported attending one or more state speech language hearing association conferences or conventions on evidence-based practice. The least frequently reported source of formal evidence-based practice was the ASHA webinar events. So the 27% starting of all total respondents, so 30% of early career, 23% of seasoned career. So compared with 10 years, a greater portion of early career and seasoned career in the current survey sample had at least one type of formal training experience in evidence-based practice. Okay, one type.
So here, I guess, can you demystify that for me?
Okay.
It's a lot of numbers, John.
There's a lot of numbers. You're right.
Okay.
I just listed all these numbers, right?
Okay.
So in prior training and evidence-based practice, they asked the participants to indicate in the forms of formal and informal training experiences, focus on evidence-based practice. Okay. The three most frequently reported types of evidence-based practice trainings were the ASHA continuing education events, other than convention or conferences, one or more graduate level courses, and ASHA convention or conference sessions. And not a lot of people have mentioned those ASHA webinars as engaged in evidence-based practice trainings.
So what is it? So they're classifying that like because they participated in those conferences, in these like seminars, that is considered having participated in EBP.
Prior training in evidence-based practice, yes.
That's the prior training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how are we defining prior training? Like your prior training, like, so you mean like you learned about EBP, like it could be EBP within a framework of some, is that what we're saying? Like, so it's like,
for me, I didn't really see the question items directly. I'm just saying, like, did you have any prior training in evidence-based practices? If so, where did you get that training from?
oh, I see. So it could technically be something like you did a phonological processes seminar that included EBP within that or something.
Correct. Correct. So now the question is like open to interpretation, right? So where have I gotten evidence-based practice training from? Oh, the ASHA convention. Okay, I'm going to mark it there. Oh, the state convention. I'm going to mark it there. Or the PECS training that my district paid for and that made everyone go to. Okay. Things like that. But are you doing like ASHA webinars? That was like that nobody told you to do. Are you self-doing that?
Nobody told you. No, there was no like incentive to do that. Or
Right.
the answer is no. No,
Like not a lot of people were doing that. Right? So like there's that thing, like, are you going to ASHA conventions? Yeah. Are you going to those state conferences? Yeah. Are you doing those ASHA webinars that's like optional? Maybe not. That's what they're doing.
Okay. All right.
So this
Okay.
the second one was that the participants answered several questions about tangible resources to support evidence-based practice, right? So which included tools that could be printed or purchased. Majority of the respondents, 90.5%, had access to a computer with internet connectivity at work to conduct searches for scientific literature. 1/3 of the respondents reported that their school district had official and unofficial guidance regarding on evidence-based practice. And then for 20% of the respondents, there were no formal or informal established evidence-based practice guidelines. And 12% were unsure whether whether this existed. So I think because of the pandemic and since everything is going virtual and even our ASHA cards turned digital for some reason, they no longer mail us the ASHA card anymore. Like everything became accessible on the website, right? That's what they're saying in terms of the resources available to support evidence-based practice.
I mean, the fact that SLPs could not answer this at a 100% rate that they had access to internet is a little shocking. Is it not? It's at 95. Not, I mean, like, I am shocked for that. I'm like, it should be 100%, right?
So here's the thing, right? We know in our school district, let's be honest, okay, that there are clinicians who are still working
Yes.
when IEPs were handwritten.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They haven't retired yet. Yeah. You think that they don't have internet access?
So
no way. You cannot do an IEP now without internet access. No way. There's no one's handwriting that anymore. Anyway,
when I was a school-based, now I feel old. When I was a school-based SLP, I've heard my colleagues say we used to write IEPs like handwritten on those carbon copy paper, the white ones, the district, the yellow ones for the parent, whatever, right? So those SLPs who are still thinking about the good old days when they're writing goals by hand. Maybe. I don't know.
No, they're not. They're gonna have it. That's ridiculous because you can't write. Currently, you cannot write it. I don't know a single school that is still like you have to. You are allowed. Even you're allowed to write. That's ridiculous. But anyway, whatever. We're moving for. How would they have even gotten this online form, John? Like I don't. Right? Isn't that confusing?
So here's the thing. I feel like 12% of 12% of SLPs responded that they weren't even sure that there was guidelines to evidence-based practice. I think I may be making assumptions, but that can also influence like, oh, I didn't know evidence-based practice was accessible online.
That is absolutely true. I don't think a lot of people know that there isn't.
Yeah.
But here, John, like just to go into the findings a little bit further.
Yeah.
Like in terms of the tangible resources that were available that people did know about, was what were the resources that they
that let's definitely look into that here. We also asked participants about tangible resources available through ASHA, right? We considered their ASHA membership to be a tangible resource.
Yeah.
And half of our respondents, their school or school district provided funding for ASHA dues, so that's great. The majority of the participants were aware of the free online access to ASHA journals for members. 75% were aware that they could receive table of contents and alerts, and 67% of those received those services, right?
Mm-hmm. So
basically saying that everything that ASHA was giving us access to, those were tangible stuff.
So I think when we should talk about that a little bit too, is that like what we're saying is that so this is just from my own experience, right? Again, being a school-based SLP, I'm not in school anymore. So therefore I don't have access to research databases right? So what ASHA provides for me as a database is the only one that I'm going to use.
Correct.
It has to be, that's what the findings are too. Is that correct? Like the findings are also that of early career SLPs are reading research.
Yes.
But in those early career, it is like mostly from ASHA.
Mostly from ASHA. So let me tell you why, right? We pay our ASHA dues, right? And it seems like December 8th, our ASHA due. Our ASHA dues are December 8th. So as we pay our annual ASHA dues, we have access to the ASHA published journals, right? Everything else outside of ASHA are either like you got to pay extra to read this. You got to have like university affiliations to read this. So SLPs are like they're not even daring. It's not even a question to go outside of ASHA. They're only going in the ASHA journals to find out the type of research that they're reading, right? Which I find very interesting in its ways, because I used to be one of those clinicians that would like, what would ASHA say? Basically that question, what would ASHA say about this, right?
Yeah.
So I have a clinical question. What would ASHA say? Let's look into their journals.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, that can be a very dangerous space to be too, right? To do that. Because what we're saying is that like whatever ASHA is willing to publish, it's gatekeeping, right? Because then ASHA, they have their own ways of what they're willing to publish and what they're not willing to do. And I guess like it's putting a lot of trust into ASHA in some ways, that they're giving me information that is, I guess it makes me question, John, rather, right? Like,
I don't think it's a, okay, let's use an elegant term. We are critically examining what ASHA is, we're critically examining the research articles that ASHA is publishing.
Yeah.
Right? So we read studies that are only accessible to ASHA, and we also see that in our survey. Whatever ASHA is publishing, we read it. But are we just blind faith? We're just gonna go with what ASHA said, or are we gonna?
So yeah, right. That's what we're saying, and it may be by accident, right? And this is me. I'm talking just even for myself, right? It's like,
yeah,
it's by accident, right? Like it's not that I'm like, oh, ASHA, I trust you so much. You are so like the top notch. It's not that. It's purely because this is all I have access to, and then to level up to that, like it's ASHA specific journals that they're willing to publish. So it will not, I feel like I don't get to read information that is published outside of speech and language. You know what I mean? Like there's special education journals. Do you know what I'm talking about, John?
I know. I totally know what you mean.
Yeah. So I don't get to read those. And those might be really valuable to me because I'm in special education. Like before I'm housed under special education. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I feel like even those intervention strategies, so a very easy one to think about is reading. Like that phonics and phonological awareness, that stuff falls under my profession. I'm kind of like still doing RTI on that kind of stuff, right? And so if that's the case, and I can only read ASHA journals on it, like, is that a real full view of phonological awareness, like what we know about reading? You get what I'm trying to say? Like, I can't read what other departments say about reading.
Or the other fields, yeah. So we lack the interdisciplinary connection with the other, what the other scholars are talking about. You're absolutely right. And maybe this podcast can definitely bring in literature from the other fields, such as disability studies, and connect it to what ASHA is talking about. So that is something that we can definitely think about here as we continue on with our podcast. You're absolutely right. I do want to be a little bit mindful about the time, so let's move on to the next concept. So intangible resources to support evidence-based practice. 46% of respondents had decided time in their weekly work schedule for engagement in evidence-based practice activity. Nearly half of those with dedicated evidence-based practice time had a total of 1 to 4 hours each week, followed by 18% with 4 or more hours weekly. And then 1/3 of respondents with with weekly time for evidence-based practice had less than 1 hour to engage.
Mhm.
And this, and I think this is totally like realistic in terms of like what our clinicians are facing every day in their school, school setting, in their work life.
Yes. Yeah. No, no. Like, we don't have time, period. If the caseload is like 65 students, you don't have time.
You don't have time.
You don't have time.
You don't have.
I only have time to be doing the actual work, the clerical work, because you can also do billing now and stuff. So there's no time to be reading this.
There is no time. There is no time to be reading this because you're seeing kids back to back to back, right?
Yeah.
You're picking kids up, you're dropping kids off, you're going to IEP meetings, you're going to staff meetings, right?
You're writing reports.
You're writing reports. There you go. I have multiple nights where I had to take my reports home, things like that. What if you're doing the SLP department meetings too? Like,
oh God, yes.
SLP department meetings, all of that. So when you're having that workload, caseload stuff, you don't have time to really like look at what Asha is saying. So it's like, yeah, totally, right?
Yeah.
And let's move on to the next domain, which is to how much are SLPs engaging with evidence-based practice, right? So to quantify the degree of SLPs engagement with evidence-based practice, we asked them to answer questions about the frequency with which they post clinical practice questions in peer-reviewed journals. If someone asked me this, and if I had to see a group, right, like in 5 minutes, I can't answer this truthfully. Right? So for example, nearly half, so 46% of respondents post 1 to 2 evidence-based questions independently. 17% reporting that they post 0 evidence-based practice questions. An additional 35.8% of respondents post between 3 to 10 evidence-based practice questions, and 1.3% post more than 10 questions. So it seems like majority of the clinicians are still thinking about evidence-based practice, but don't really have time to delve into it because nearly half only post 1 to 2 evidence-based questions, right? Evidence-based practice questions. So again, that really goes into like the workload, caseload situation. And then the last area would be the desired evidence-based practice resources, trainings, needs, and preferences. So we asked respondents to consider resources other than time that would support their efforts to engage in evidence-based practice in the workplace. Nearly half, 47.5% of the respondents indicated that interest in having evidence-based practice study group or support group would be beneficial. 36% wanted clear evidence-based practice policies or procedures at the school district level. 30% wanted evidence-based practice mentor and search engine subscriptions.
Yes.
And nearly 1/4, 24.4%, wanted better access to computer with internet connectivity.
Schools are not able to provide that. It's just outlandish, right? Like, that's gonna be against like a federal law or something because you're not giving us the tools. But anyway, yeah, John, those are interesting findings overall about research. And again, I kind of question when we look at those findings too. I wonder if the participants who had filled out this information, if they knew what the questions were really asking, right? Because something like, did you pose any EBP
questions? Like, what is that?
Yeah. And also, like, if you so for example, like if I'm doing a clinical trial, right? I'm sorry, not clinical trial. I'm working. Basically, I'm doing therapy, right?
Right.
And I'm like, bro, what is going on? Why does he keep on stopping? I have no idea why the stopping keeps happening. Or like, that's so weird. Like, I already tried all these methods. Like, I would think of that as potentially posing an EBP practice because though maybe I didn't go as far as finding the answer to it, like, wouldn't that be a question? Because I'm asking myself, like,
So like I think the better way to ask this is like, have you really, you know, are you asking yourself the clinical questions that you need for your clients?
Yeah.
If so, how many times are you asking that? Right? Rather than saying evidence-based practice questions. I'm like, what do you even mean?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
Right? And maybe we are making assumptions because we didn't see the survey question items. But if somebody asked me, like, Sarah, did you ask yourself an evidence-based practice question today? And be like, what is that?
Yeah.
You know?
And I think like just to go back to like what you had originally said in the very beginning of our podcast today is that like, there can be some limitations because it's a quantitative study, and that would also be one of them, right? Like that maybe it was unclear what EVP was defined as, A, and B, like what does it mean to pose an EVP question? And
Right.
like so that is, and we're not able to see what the questions were here based off of this research either, but we could imagine that some of this could have been confusing for the 800 participants of this survey.
I bet you. Absolutely.
And it's a lot of people. I'm impressed by the 800, right? Like, have you ever seen an 800? I'm like, dang, that's a lot.
So here's the thing. There's a lot of variability to look into this data, right? So let's say like I've been in the field for about 20 something years and I get this question. I'm like, oh crap, I never asked. Right. And oh crap, I never asked because everything, since the more you work with kids, you have that gut feeling. Your clinical gut feeling tells me that this would work. And I'm sure the seasoned clinicians be like, yep, it worked. So you really don't have to ask. Early careers, on the other hand, is like, why can't my kids say the R sound?
I see where you're saying.
Like, why am I dealing with this, like, repetitions, elongations? Like, why? I've tried everything, right?
Yeah.
Or like, let me see what the research is saying. The older clinicians, like, I've been there, I've done that. It's kind of like parenthood. I've done this. Right. While the younger clinicians are like younger clinicians, kind of like the younger parents are like, I'm reading all the parenting books I can,
Yes, John. I like what you're saying. Like there are a lot of variables in this of why this could be the case. Because again, back to the triangle of Ashar, right? We're saying that seasoned SLPs may be leaning on their clinical experience and clinical judgment more than the research, whereas like early careers might be leaning to the research more because they haven't built the clinical judgment.
Right. They don't have the experience. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Got it. So those are really great findings. And it sounds like, or is that it?
So those are the four things, right? I mean, we can talk about it long, but I do want to be mindful about our participants here. I mean, if you're interested in delving a little bit more about this research, we can definitely post this article onto our website or onto our domain if, and let's definitely talk about the limitations here. It's really hilarious on what they said. They admit the limitations is like, okay, we confess we didn't do this. That's what they're saying. It's sometimes I just jump into their confessionals, like we didn't do this, we confess. And so like they said, although not a limitation of the study per se, the data cleaning process to eliminate bot-generated or mischievous survey responses was quite time-consuming. Despite preventative measures in place, researchers should be aware that changes in technology require careful consideration of data integrity. So they're saying, yeah, we didn't do data cleaning. Yeah, we didn't really identify whether, the clinicians were just clicking things to get this done or was some meeting response, right?
Uh-huh.
And they're even saying like up to 37% of respondents did not answer demographic questions, years of experience, school type, caseload size, which has the potential to impact data analysis for subgroups, right? So these are the limitations about this. For me, I would definitely, my epistemology of what is considered the theory of knowledge, what is considered a legitimate knowledge is their experiences with evidence-based practice. So the data tells us that that their experiences with evidence-based practice was only through like big events, ASHA, district-wide training,
Mhm.
right? It's like, oh, do you want to join our webinar? No. If it's optional, no, we're not doing it. I would, right? So like, what is making you select that? And I think that's what the survey studies are lacking in terms of like what is making you lack, like what is making you respond that way. And that's what qualitative research is really aiming for. Like, what is your sense making? Why is it leading you to not go do the online webinar that much? And we also need to know like 889 participants are great, but school settings are different. Maybe you have a wonderful school setting with administrator that understands. Maybe you're in a Title I school. You're the only SLP in this small closet room, you know? Nobody appreciates what I do. Like no one knows my job
Mhm.
compared to I have a big special ed team.
Mhm.
I can also rely on my OTs who share a room with.
Mhm.
I have my special ed team that knows what I do, and we always collaborate with each other. Compares to like I'm just this random person who takes kids into the class, into a small room and work on speech sounds. So those are the things I really want to like take into consideration is like, what is making clinicians choose this over that, right? And that's what qualitative research methods are are really telling us, and why are experienced or seasoned clinicians not going into research that much? Because knowing our field, we're consistently changing. Our studies are consistently changing. Our findings are always like up to date. But why are seasoned clinicians not looking at that research?
Mhm.
What is it? There's a lot of questions to really unveil here. But I have to admit, even with qualitative data, is biased because my sample size is very small.
Mhm.
And I think in one of the literature that I do want to share with everyone here is Cresswell et al., this is a book chapter saying that the distance between you and the distance between you and the participants are getting closer. Here for 889, my intellectual distance between between the SLPs and the researcher is pretty far. I don't have a lot of background detail. I don't know you as to why you selected this, but the data tells me that X amount of SLPs have selected that.
Mhm.
So it's like a give or take. Do you want to do a large data study, or do you really want to know what is causing you to select this over that?
So it sounds like at the end of this study, essentially what we know is that a lot of early career SLPs are reading research, but the later career SLPs are not. And collectively, everybody who is reading research is using ASHA engines, right? ASHA search engines.
Right.
And essentially, that's all we know, but we don't know why, right? Like, we don't know enough for context.
We don't know the context, right? Right. And like what is their understanding of evidence-based practice questions when, what is that to you? And how is that dictating you to answer those, have those questions? Um, so there's a lot of things to unpack here, and I feel like some of them are systematic, some of them are very like political, such as when we pay our ASHA dues, we only have access to ASHA journals, right? And ASHA has its own little system, right? For me, I submitted a journal article under review by ASHA right now. So if ASHA likes what I'm saying, published. If ASHA doesn't approve what I'm saying, denied. I have to go to a different journal. And if
Right.
I go publish at a different journal, that audience, like I'm losing my SLPs.
Mm-hmm.
It goes to another journal with another set of audience that reads that journal. So we got to be critically questioning our access to information, access to data, access to the types of things that we're reading here. And I think this podcast will definitely open up a lot of SLP's eyes and clinicians to really think about like, what is the article saying? What is research really saying? But what is research not saying at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, what can research look like when it's outside of our field?
Right, right. And I think I am so excited to introduce so many articles that are outside of the ASHA journals about that. Yeah.
Yeah. and how they intersect. There's so much intersection, I think, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
just because it's social work, that doesn't mean that doesn't apply to our students because they're people, you know what I mean? And
Right.
cultures. And so how that can all like intersect is going to be really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to doing that more with you, John. Thank you for spending your evening with me.
Sounds great. No, it's such a pleasure. I mean, I don't think researchers really seek the time to sit down with a clinician and talk about like what why are we not in conversation in the first place?
Yeah.
And how can we look at research critically that will help your clients and families and patients along the way? So
Yeah.
yeah.
And, just to end on that note, when we say that we're EBP, what does that mean? And
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. What does that
right,
even mean?
what does
Yeah.
that mean? And why aren't we ever taught how to read research? We are only given research to read and told that that was the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So what is ABP? How do we even do it if we don't even know what it is?
Yes, exactly, exactly. So I hope this podcast will definitely open up a lot of clinicians' eyes and ears to really question what is evidence-based practice? What are journals outside of ASHA really telling us? And how can we apply that in our clinical practice? So yeah.
Love it. Thank you, John. And
All right.
do our next podcast soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.